Hey there, it's Jason from Codemanship with another rookie mistake video. This might be a little contentious, um, but I still hear, although it's becoming more rare, thankfully, I still hear a lot of developers talking about testing as somebody else's job, some activity or some phase in the development process that happens downstream is performed by other people. Now, the problem with this approach is that it leaves testing usually too late. Um, so developers, by the time their code's been tested, have already moved on to something else. So it becomes a much bigger deal to then have to go back to that code and fix the inevitable bugs, because the more code we write before we test, the more likely it is that we'll introduce bugs. And the longer we go before we discover those bugs, if we leave it downstream to someone else to find them, the bigger the effort it usually takes to fix those bugs. And it's not at all uncommon for teams to end up spending most of their time just fixing bugs because of the overhead of this. Now, the cure to this ill is to test sooner. So rather than considering testing as some downstream phase or activity in development that's performed by someone else or even performed by yourself for that matter, the teams that tend to handle this much better are the ones who treat testing as a continuous activity throughout development. So while a developer is writing code, for example, they're testing as they go. They code a bit, they test a bit, they code a bit, they test a bit. Um, so if they have broken it or they have made a boo boo, they're finding out straight away when it's an easy fix. For example, they can just undo and try something else. So, for example, if I've got some logic I need to write that calculates shipping costs for orders, and we've got a bunch of business rules that I've discussed with my customer, and if I put my testing hat on, and every developer needs to have at least a small testing hat. I'm not suggesting that developers are going to become world renowned testing experts, although some of them have. Um, but I think every developer should have a testing hat. That the basics of testing, if you like, for example, figuring out logical combinations of business rules, um, and using basic test analysis techniques like decision tables, that kind of thing, I think are very useful for a developer, because it means that we can bring testing forward, to while, for example, we're discussing the requirements or while we're writing the code. So if I'm writing some shipping logic here, let's create a shipping function, and the business rule is that for orders that total £100 or more that are in the UK, so we'll need a region there, that are in the UK, the shipping charge is free, so it's zero. So let's just say that's our basic version there, and let's make it strongly typed. So let's create an enum for the region so that we're not ending up in a situation where people are just passing in willy-nilly any old values. So we'll use the enum type in uh, Python. There we go. And all we need to know at the moment is it in the UK? Okay, there we go. The formatting looks good. Right, now, I could carry on and write more code, but I'm kind of in the habit these days of coding a bit and testing a bit. In fact, if you know me, you probably know that I'm in the habit of doing it the other way around, writing a test and then coding a bit to make it pass. But let's do it the traditional way. Let's write some code and test it. Now I can, in Python, immediately go to my Python console here and check to see. We need to import the shipping function and the region enum. Check to see what the shipping cost of an order for exactly £100. So let's put it right on the boundary there, to make it clear where the boundary is. And we're saying that this customer is in the UK. That's where we're shipping it to. So we should get a total of zero. So that's a big tick for that first test case. Now, the next business rule that we need to think about is what happens if the customer is in the EU. And if they're in the EU, what we're saying is shipping cost is £5. So it stays the same for the UK. Only a small change we need to make there. And then for the EU, it's £5. So we code a little bit. Let's restart our console session now because we've changed the code and import shipping and region. Okay. And our new test case is for the EU. So again, the order total is £100 or more. In this case, we'll just make exactly 100. So we're right on the boundary. And let's put our shipping address in the EU and see what happens. So we should now get a shipping cost of £5. Now that I've edited the shipping function, there is a danger that what was working before for the UK no longer works. So I need to do what's called regression testing. I need to revisit any tests. Change I just made might have broken. So let's repeat the original test for the UK. Off we go. Yeah, and so for the UK, it's exactly zero. So it's working for both of those cases. Let's take another little step forward. So outside of the UK and the EU, shipping costs are £10 for orders of £100 or more. So let's add another branch there. Oops, another if statement there. Oh, come on. And then £10 for shipping addresses that are outside the UK and the EU. And again, I need to start my console session because I've changed the code. You can imagine this is going to get very tiresome, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay. And now we've got this other shipping address. So again, it's for £100 or more. So let's put it right on the boundary. And this time, let's put our shipping address in other. So we should get a shipping cost of 10. But again, I've edited the shipping function, which means I could have broken the code for those other two cases. So we need to regression test. We need to revisit those test cases that might now be broken. So let's do the UK again. And let's do the EU again. Okay, and let's make sure that's £5. So it's working for those previous test cases. Now you can imagine as we go through more and more of these cycles, the number of times I have to repeat tests is going to grow and grow and grow. And this is where test automation comes in. So we find ourselves repeating the same simple task over and over again. It makes sense to automate that, to write some code to do it for us. So I'm going to automate these three tests before I move forward onto new test cases. So if I automate the three tests that I was doing on the Python console, it's now but the work of a moment, just the flick of a switch to rerun those tests, which means I can test over and over and over again, cutting out all of that boring donkey work and speeding up that code test cycle considerably. And the speed of that code test cycle is the key to having code that is shippable pretty much at any time. You're never more than a few minutes away from code that has been tested. Hopefully, all the tests are passing and is therefore potentially shippable. And that unlocks the door to shorter delivery lead times, that we can get features or change requests into production sooner. Um, and from a business point of view, that is a very desirable thing. But it is only possible if we treat testing as a continuous activity throughout development. And that means, I'm afraid, that developers will have to do quite a lot of their own testing. Now, before the testers in the room start throwing the furniture around, I am not suggesting that developers are necessarily going to become testing experts, although quite a few have, and vice versa, has to be said. Um, Most developers can learn enough about the basics of testing to take care of much of the testing. the 80% of testing that will make the big difference, that will catch the bugs sooner. There's really, really no reason why you can't learn the basics, things like decision tables, state machines, boundary equivalence classes, combinations, permutations, test automation, etc., etc. Most developers can learn to do the basics of these, and most of the time it's the basics that you need. For those cases where you really do need deep and wide testing experience, it's good to have a testing expert on the team. Um, but you still need to see testing as very much your job as well as the tester's job. Because when you don't, when you throw it over the wall or you kick the ball down the road, as it were, for someone else to catch, well, the consequences can be quite severe.